there, it's me, SpongeBob. Welcome to Sleepy Sponge Lore, a place where the secrets of Bikini Bottom drift like dreams beneath the waves. So take a deep breath, get comfy, and let the ocean carry you to sleep. Let the video begin.
Far from the sea, under skies so wide they seemed endless, a girl was born with a heart tuned to both silence and wonder. Her name was Sandy, and from the very beginning, she carried in her spirit a kind of listening, a way of hearing the world as if it were whispering secrets meant just for her. The winds of Texas brushed across the flat fields, bending tall grasses like slow waves, and she would sit quietly among them, watching how the earth breathed, how shadows stretched and shrank with the sun. She felt comforted by these movements, though she could never explain why. It was as if she already knew she belonged to a rhythm greater than herself. We want you to know before we go further that we truly love and care for you. Whoever you are, wherever you rest tonight, your presence here matters. Before we begin this journey, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. In those early years, Sandy's world was simple but never dull. She liked to sit near the old wooden fence that bordered her family's land, tools in her hands, scraps of wire, and broken pieces of machinery spread out before her. To others, they were nothing but discarded metal and forgotten parts. To Sandy, they were puzzle pieces of something waiting to be born. She wasn't yet old enough to give names to what she made, nor to explain what moved her to try. She only knew that when she twisted two pieces together and saw them spark or hum, her heart lifted like the wind itself had chosen her. Her family often found her strange. Her brothers and cousins would race horses or skip stones, while Sandy crouched near the dirt, staring at ants carrying crumbs bigger than themselves, sketching little designs in her notebook that no one could quite understand. "She's got a head in the clouds," her uncle would mutter, though not unkindly. Her mother, however, simply smiled when she saw her daughter's faraway eyes. "Don't worry about Sandy," she would say softly. "She's just listening to something the rest of us can't hear." At night, long after the household had gone quiet, Sandy would lie awake with the window cracked open. The stars above her Texas sky were bright and innumerable, like an ocean she had never known she was missing. Sometimes she imagined they were lanterns left for travelers, tiny lights meant to guide her somewhere beyond the horizon. On such nights, she would whisper to herself, "Someday I'll see what waits out there." She didn't know where there was. She only knew her heart tilted toward the unknown, as if gravity itself were pointing her away from the fields. One evening, she built a tiny contraption from springs and tin. It looked like a toy to anyone else, but when she wound it up and placed it near the window, it began to hum a soft, wavering tune. It wasn't music exactly, more like the murmur of wind caught in glass. She let it play, eyes heavy with sleep, and swore she heard words hidden inside the sound. Not sentences, not anything she could repeat, just the suggestion of voices calling across distance, kind and patient. It was the first time she truly felt that her inventions were more than inventions. They were bridges reaching somewhere she could not yet go. Sandy's childhood passed like this, half in the dust of Texas, half in dreams of somewhere else. She grew tall and strong from chores, quick of hand from endless tinkering, but her true growth was quiet and inward. Every failure of a machine taught her patience. Every curious look from her neighbors reminded her that difference was not a weakness. And every night, under those endless stars, she felt more certain that the whispers she heard were preparing her for something greater. When storms rolled across the plains, Sandy never hid. She stood outside, letting the rain soak through her clothes, watching lightning carve bright paths through the sky. While others feared the thunder, she felt a strange comfort in it. To her, the storm was proof that the world was alive, roaring and laughing and weeping all at once. She thought perhaps one day she would find a place where she could be alive like that too. Though she didn't yet know it, these nights of starlight and storm were shaping her into someone who could leave home without bitterness, who could carry love for her land even as she sought another. The whispers had planted seeds. The winds had taught her how to bend without breaking. The stars had promised her that no distance was too far if she carried wonder in her chest. And so, before the sea ever knew her name, Sandy's story had already begun, woven into the silence of Texas nights, humming from the inventions of a little girl who listened not just with her ears, but with her whole heart. The years that followed those first whispered nights seemed to glide by like clouds, slow and unhurried, yet carrying Sandy gently forward. Her little inventions became bigger, her hands more skilled, her imagination less of a daydream and more of a living thing that demanded to be built. She could no longer be content with scraps and tin alone. She sought wood, gears, glass, anything she could convince her family to part with. At times they sighed and shook their heads at her odd projects, but more often than not they let her be. They sensed something in her, a current running beneath the surface, and they knew it was better to let it flow. One summer afternoon, the heat hung heavy, and the cicadas droned so loudly it was as though the air itself was vibrating. Sandy sat beneath the shade of a pecan tree, a cluster of half-finished contraptions spread out on a blanket. She was working on a little device she called her breather, a strange assortment of pipes and valves, awkward and clumsy, but already hinting at an idea that would grow more important later. She didn't know yet why she was drawn to making a thing that could help someone breathe in a place without air. She only knew that when she put it to her mouth and tested the flow, a faint hiss carried through, like a secret between herself and the wide world. Her younger brother came running then, laughing, his boots kicking up dust. "Sandy, come play," he called. She looked up and smiled, brushing the grease from her fingers. She wanted to join him, to let the day be nothing more than games and sun, yet there was always something inside her that pulled her back to her work. She chased him for a while anyway, their laughter echoing across the fields. But even as she ran, her mind returned to the breather, to the hiss and hum, to the question of what it might one day mean. Her nights deepened with the same quiet mystery. The little humming toy by the window had long since broken, but the voices she thought she heard had not gone away. Sometimes, lying awake, she wondered if they were only her imagination, the result of being a girl too full of curiosity. Other times, she was certain they were real. Gentle, patient voices that never pressed her, only accompanied her, as though the stars themselves were companions keeping watch. That thought comforted her, especially on nights when loneliness pressed in. By her teenage years, Sandy had grown into herself, both strong and graceful, her spirit unbent by the sideways glances of those who never quite understood her. While others dreamt of staying close to the land, building lives not far from where they were born, she began to sense her own story stretching beyond the horizon. She didn't reject what she had. She loved her family, her home, the open sky that had raised her. But in her heart, she felt something like the tug of a tide, soft yet insistent. One evening, a storm rose with little warning. Dark clouds gathered at the edges of the sky, and thunder grumbled across the plains. While the rest of the household pulled shutters closed and lit lanterns, Sandy slipped outside, pulled by an irresistible urge. She stood in the field, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide as the first lightning streaked across the heavens. In that moment, something within her shifted. The storm no longer seemed distant or frightening. It felt like an answer, a reminder that she belonged not only here, but everywhere the world could roar and whisper. She whispered back, her words swallowed by wind and rain. "Someday, I'll follow you." It was not a vow of escape, but of belonging. a promise to herself that she would go where her heart pulled, carrying with her all the love of her home. In the months that followed, she began to dream more clearly of water, not rivers or lakes, but a vastness she had never seen with her eyes, only with her mind. She drew strange sketches in the margins of her notebooks, helmets that looked like fish bowls, suits that clung tight to the body, great domes filled with air. To her, these weren't fantasies. They were possibilities, shimmering like heat waves above the road. Her family sometimes asked, half in jest, "Sandy, where do you think you're going to go with all these wild ideas?" She would smile softly and shrug, unwilling to answer. How could she explain that she felt guided not by logic alone, but by whispers, by storms, by stars that seemed to blink with secret knowledge? It was not a matter of if she would leave, but when, and though that knowledge weighed heavy, it also steadied her. The girl who once played with scraps of metal had grown into a young woman whose heart belonged to two worlds, the familiar comfort of her Texas home and the vast unknown that called to her each night. She did not yet know the shape of her journey nor the depth of the sea that awaited her. She only knew that every invention, every storm, every whisper had been leading her closer. As Sandy grew older, her inventions no longer felt like curiosities scattered across blankets under the pecan tree. They began to carry weight, to hum with purpose, as if they were quietly preparing her for a life beyond the familiar fields. Each creation seemed to bridge the space between her present and her unseen future. And though she still could not name where her journey would lead, she sensed that the things she made were whispers of that destination. The breather she once tested as a child was rebuilt and refined countless times. She adjusted the valves, reshaped the pipes, until at last it offered a steady flow of air that could last longer than a few shallow breaths. She carried it with her sometimes when she waded into the small creek near her home. Kneeling in the shallows, she would submerge her face, holding the device to her mouth, and breathe slowly through it. The water muffled the sounds of the world, turning the laughter of her siblings and the buzzing of insects into distant, softened echoes. In those moments, she imagined she was far below the surface of a vast ocean, wrapped in silence, with only her thoughts and the slow rhythm of her breath for company. Her family noticed, of course. They saw her sitting by the creek with strange contraptions strapped to her face and shook their heads in confusion. Yet even in their puzzlement, they let her be. They had long accepted that Sandy's path curved differently than theirs. There was affection in their bemusement, a kind of unspoken trust that whatever she was chasing, she would find. One evening, after a long day of working on her devices, Sandy's father came to sit beside her on the porch. He didn't speak right away, only watched the horizon as the sun sank low, painting the sky with ribbons of pink and gold. Finally, he asked in a quiet voice, "What is it you're building towards, Sandy? What are you looking for out there?" She paused, her hands resting on the half-finished sketch in her notebook. "I don't rightly know," she admitted, "but I feel it pulling me, like there's a place waiting for me, and if I keep building, I'll be ready when I find it." Her father studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well," he said softly, "wherever it is, just promise me you'll take the love of this place with you. That's all we've got to give," she smiled, closing her notebook gently. "I'll carry it with me," she said, and she meant it. The voices she had once heard in the hum of her machines grew less vague as she grew older. It was not that they became clearer in words, they never spoke in sentences, but rather that she began to understand them differently. They were not outside of her, not strangers calling from beyond the stars. They were echoes of her own longing, her own courage, woven into sound. When she worked on a machine late at night, listening to its clicks and hisses, she realized the voices were part of her, reminders that she was not just tinkering aimlessly, but walking towards something greater. With this quiet conviction, she poured herself deeper into her work. She built suits that could endure pressure, helmets that could hold air, small domes that could stand against wind and rain. To her family, these projects were marvels and mysteries, but to Sandy, they were practice, rehearsals for a stage she had not yet stepped upon. Each invention left her more certain she was not meant to stay still. There were moments of doubt, of course. On lonely nights, she wondered if her yearning was nothing more than a restless dream, the kind that lingers for years and leads nowhere. She feared that perhaps she was reaching for a horizon that would always move further away. Yet when those doubts pressed hardest, she would look to the stars. They still shimmered like lanterns, quiet and patient, and she felt their gaze steady her heart. It was as though they whispered, "Keep going," and so she did. The girl who once played in the grass now stood taller, steadier, her hands and heart working as one. She was still rooted in her family's love, still tender in her laughter, still warmed by the fields of her childhood. But inside her a tide was swelling. It had begun as a whisper, then a hum, and now it pressed against her, urging her toward a life far from the land she knew. Her inventions were no longer merely the marks of curiosity. They were the map, the compass, and the vessel. And though she could not yet see the sea that waited for her, she felt certain she was already on her way. The day came when Sandy's inventions no longer fit neatly into the quiet life of her family's farm. The creek that once seemed like a vast playground felt suddenly too small, its shallow waters unable to hold the depth of her dreams. The fields, endless as they appeared, began to feel like walls. She still loved them, the pecan trees, the red dirt, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the heat, but she felt the weight of a truth she could not deny. Home was no longer the place where her journey would stay. It was the ground she had grown from, and now she was ready to stretch beyond it. Her decision wasn't loud or sudden. It unfolded gently like dawn creeping across the horizon, inevitable and soft. One evening she sat at the kitchen table, papers and sketches spread before her, and told her family in a steady voice, "I'm going to leave. I don't know when exactly, but soon. I have to." There was silence after her words, a silence filled with the creak of the old clock on the wall and the faint hiss of the lantern. Her brothers looked at her with wide eyes, her cousins with confusion, but her mother simply nodded. "I always knew," she said, her voice warm and calm. "You were born with your gaze set further than ours." Her father, though quiet at first, finally spoke as well. "If this is the path you feel called to, we won't hold you back. Just remember where you come from, Sandy. Don't let the world take that from you." That night, Sandy lay awake, listening to the familiar chorus of crickets and the sighing wind. For the first time, instead of comforting her, the sounds seemed to be urging her forward, as though the land itself was giving her its blessing to go. She didn't cry, though her chest felt heavy. She simply stared at the ceiling, whispering into the dark, "I'll carry you with me." From that day on, her work took on a new urgency. She began crafting with purpose, refining her breather, shaping suits that could withstand strange pressures, designing the framework for a dome that could house not only her body, but her heart. She knew she was building for a world she had never seen, and yet each adjustment felt guided, as though her hands already knew what the sea would demand of her. The first whispers of opportunity arrived quietly. Letters from scientific groups, rumors of projects seeking minds willing to push the boundaries of what was known. Sandy had never sought recognition, but somehow her work had carried beyond the farm. One letter in particular arrived with a seal she did not recognize, its words both mysterious and promising. It spoke of exploration, of places beyond the land, of discoveries waiting for those brave enough to step outside the familiar. Reading it, Sandy felt her breath catch. She didn't know exactly who had sent it, nor how they had heard of her, but she understood at once that this was the beginning. Her family gathered around when she read the letter aloud. Their faces were a mixture of pride and sorrow, the sweetness of love tangled with the ache of parting. Her younger brother clung to her arm and asked if she would come back. Sandy kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Of course, my heart will always find its way here." It was not a promise of return in body, but in love. He didn't fully understand, but he held on to her anyway. As the day of her leaving drew near, the land itself seemed to join in the farewell. The winds grew softer, the sunsets more vivid, as if the world wanted her to remember every detail before she stepped into another. She walked the fields slowly, taking in the sound of grass brushing against her boots, the feel of dirt between her fingers, the scent of pecan wood drifting in the air. Every sensation pressed itself into her memory, becoming part of the foundation she would carry forward. On the morning she was to depart, the house was hushed. Her bags were packed, her inventions carefully crated, her heart full to the brim with both grief and hope. She hugged each of her family members, their embraces lingering as if they could hold her in place a moment longer. Yet, when she stepped out onto the road, there was no hesitation in her stride. The pull that had whispered to her since childhood was no longer a mystery. It was a current, steady and sure, and she had chosen to follow it. As the farm receded into the distance, Sandy turned once to look back. The fields glowed golden in the morning light, the sky stretched wide and endless, and for a moment it felt as though the stars themselves had bent down to rest above her home. She raised a hand in farewell, her heart heavy and full all at once, then turned her eyes toward the horizon she had been chasing for so long. The journey away from the land of her birth had begun, gentle yet certain, like the first step into water that deepens with every stride. The sea was nothing like the fields she had left behind. Where Texas stretched wide and open beneath the unbroken sky, the ocean curved inward, folding around her with its shifting depths and endless hues. It was at once suffocating and liberating, an embrace that carried both weight and wonder. Sandy felt it immediately when she first descended, her helmet sealing the air around her, her heart racing with both fear and awe. The silence was different here, thicker, filled with murmurs she could not yet understand. It was not the quiet of fields at night, but the living hush of a world that breathed differently. She carried her crates carefully, each packed with inventions and pieces of her vision. The breather, now perfected, guided her through those first hours beneath the waves. Every exhale bubbled upward, a silver string of proof that she could belong here. She had practiced for years in creeks and rivers, but this was no imitation. It was the vast, endless sea, and she was now part of it. She had chosen her site with care, a patch of seabed nestled against a gentle slope of coral, far enough from busy schools of fish to give her solitude, yet close enough to the bustle of undersea life that she could feel its pulse. She set to work immediately, her hands moving with the determination of someone carrying out a plan whispered into her bones. The dome began as a skeleton of steel arches, heavy pieces lowered into place with the help of weighted anchors. She labored tirelessly, her suit clumsy but her spirit steady. The water resisted her, pulling at every movement, but she learned to move with it, bending into its rhythm rather than fighting against it. When at last the glass panels were fitted and sealed, the dome gleamed like a bubble caught in sunlight, fragile yet unyielding. Inside she created a pocket of air, pumping it carefully until she could remove her helmet and take her first breath in her new home. The moment was quiet, almost anticlimactic. She stood in the center of the empty dome, surrounded by her crates and tools, and inhaled. The air tasted sharp, tinged faintly with salt, but it was hers. She laughed softly to herself, the sound bouncing oddly against the curved glass. It wasn't grand or triumphant. It was tender, a sigh of relief that her dream had found a body. Days turned into weeks as she furnished the dome. She planted small patches of grass and flowers brought from the surface, their green a balm against the blues of the ocean. She rigged hammocks from sturdy ropes, built shelves from salvaged driftwood, and arranged her tools with careful precision. Bit by bit, the dome became more than a structure. It became a home, a bridge between her two worlds. At night, when the sea outside grew dark and the dome glowed softly with the light of her lamps, Sandy would sit by the glass and watch the ocean drift by. Schools of fish shimmered like starlight, their bodies moving in patterns that reminded her of constellations she once traced in the Texas sky. The waves whispered against the glass, and though she sometimes longed for the sound of cicadas, she found comfort in this new kind of music. Loneliness, however, was not so easily tamed. In the first months, there were nights when her chest ached with the absence of familiar voices. She would hold a letter from home, running her fingers over the ink, and whisper promises into the silence. "I'll write back soon. I'm all right. I'm still me." She built little devices to fill the quiet, a mechanical bird that chirped softly in the mornings, a music box that hummed a lullaby in the evenings. These sounds reminded her that she was not entirely alone. It was during one of these evenings, as she sat listening to the bird's gentle tune, that she noticed a shadow moving outside the dome. Her heart quickened, though not with fear. Pressing her hands to the glass, she saw a curious sponge with wide eyes peering in at her, his face pressed close as though trying to make sense of this strange bubble of air on the seafloor. He lingered only a moment before darting away, leaving Sandy with a soft smile curling across her face. She had built her dome for herself, but perhaps, just perhaps, it might become something more. Still, she did not rush. Her days continued in quiet rhythm, tending her plants, refining her inventions, learning the language of the tides. She listened for the sea's whispers as once she had listened for the stars. And in her solitude, she discovered something profound, that home was not bound to land or sea, but to the love and wonder she carried within her. The dome stood like a lantern in the deep, glowing softly in the dark waters. It was not a fortress, not a hiding place, but a promise that a land-born girl could belong beneath the waves, that the distance between worlds could be bridged by patience, courage, and care. And though she did not yet know the friends who would soon fill her life with laughter and warmth, Sandy Cheeks had taken the first quiet step toward becoming not just a visitor in the sea, but part of its story. The first weeks after Sandy noticed the curious sponge were marked by a subtle shift in the rhythm of her solitude. Though the dome remained her sanctuary, she often found herself glancing outward, watching the waters for that small, bright-eyed figure. She had not expected company beneath the sea, at least not this soon, and the memory of his face, so open, so eager, lingered in her thoughts. The ocean was vast, yet it felt suddenly smaller, as if she were no longer entirely alone. One evening, as she worked on repairing a joint in her air pump, she caught sight of movement beyond the glass. There he was again, hovering near the dome, his body tilted in curious fascination. This time he did not dart away when she turned, but pressed his hands against the glass, mirroring her own. Sandy chuckled softly, her voice muffled inside the dome, and lifted her hand to meet his. Their palms touched, separated only by the barrier of glass and water. It was the first time she felt the true warmth of the sea folk, not through words, but through a simple gesture of wonder. Over the next days, he returned again and again. Sometimes he brought small treasures from the ocean floor, a shell shaped like a spiral, a shard of coral gleaming red, a smooth stone polished by waves. He would set them gently against the glass, offering them like gifts, his wide smile a language clearer than any words. Sandy, in turn, began to leave little tokens for him in a hatch she built near the dome's entrance, tiny gadgets she crafted from scraps of metal, toys that whirred and clicked when wounded. When he discovered these gifts waiting for him, his laughter carried through the water like bubbles of joy. Yet for all their silent exchanges, Sandy yearned to speak. She wanted to know his name, to hear the sound of his voice, to share her story and learn his in return. The barrier of water was a stubborn one, but she had faced greater challenges before. Night after night, she sketched designs on her workbench, tinkering with valves and tubes, refining her breather to allow conversation across the divide. The first attempt was clumsy. She ventured out in her suit, her voice muffled through the device, while he floated before her, tilting his head in confusion. But as she adjusted the dials and tightened the seals, clarity began to emerge. Her words came through in fragments at first, broken by bubbles but enough to carry meaning. And when at last she managed a simple, "Howdy," the sponge's eyes widened, and he burst into laughter so pure and unrestrained that Sandy could not help but laugh with him. That was how she learned his name, SpongeBob, a name as bright and simple as his spirit. He spoke quickly, words tumbling out like currents, eager to tell her about jellyfishing, bubble blowing, and his pet snail Gary. Sandy listened with quiet amusement, her heart warmed by his unfiltered joy. She, in turn, shared pieces of her own life, stories of Texas skies, of rodeos and wide-open plains, of nights lying in the grass counting stars. He listened as though she were describing a dream, his imagination painting pictures he had never seen. Their friendship blossomed like coral after a storm. He visited daily, knocking cheerfully against the dome's glass until Sandy came out to meet him. Together they explored the surrounding reefs, Sandy in her suit, SpongeBob darting ahead with boundless energy. He introduced her to Patrick, a pink starfish with a mind as wandering as the tides, whose simple delight in the world reminded Sandy of children back home chasing fireflies. At first, she worried her inventions and strange ways might set her apart, but SpongeBob's acceptance was absolute. To him, her differences were not barriers, they were marvels. For Sandy, the ocean began to feel less like an exile and more like a frontier filled with companions. She no longer spent her nights staring only at the fish beyond the glass. Now she replayed conversations, remembered laughter, and dreamed of adventures yet to come. Still, a quiet voice lingered within her, reminding her of the distance between land and sea, between her roots and this new life. Friendship did not erase that longing, but it softened its edges, wrapping it in warmth. One evening, as the dome glowed softly against the dark sea, SpongeBob sat cross-legged on the seabed outside, his nose pressed against the glass. Sandy watched him from within, her heart caught between amusement and tenderness. She thought of the nights she once spent in Texas, wishing for a sign that she was not alone in her dreams. Now, here beneath the ocean, that wish had taken form in the shape of a sponge with laughter bright enough to rival the stars. She stepped outside, her suit hissing as it sealed. SpongeBob leapt up, his face alight with excitement. "Where we going, Sandy?" he asked, his voice bubbling with anticipation. "Nowhere in particular," she said softly, adjusting the controls on her suit. "Just thought we could walk a spell." And so they did, side by side along the sandy floor, past coral and seagrass, swaying like fields in the wind. It was a simple walk, yet to Sandy it felt profound, as if each step carried her further from loneliness and closer to belonging. The sea was no longer just a place she had chosen to live. It was a place that had chosen her in return, offering her friendship as deep and enduring as the waters themselves. The sea had its own kind of dawn. Unlike the sharp blaze of morning she remembered from Texas, Here the light drifted slowly through the water, soft and filtered, as if the ocean wanted to stretch itself awake without hurry. Sandy had come to love that quiet unfolding, the way shadows lifted from the reef, the way schools of fish shimmered like shifting curtains. On one such morning, SpongeBob came bouncing toward her dome, his arms waving so wildly she half wondered if he'd sprung a leak. "Sandy?" His voice bubbled through the water as she stepped out in her suit. "Patrick and I found something amazing." Sandy smiled beneath her helmet. With SpongeBob, amazing could mean anything from a new kind of jellyfish to a rock shaped like a sandwich. Still, there was a spark in his eyes that tugged at her curiosity. Patrick, not far behind, waved with both arms, nearly tumbling backward from the effort. "What is it you all found?" Sandy asked, adjusting the dials on her suit. "It's a cave," SpongeBob declared, bouncing in place. "A secret cave, Sandy? You gotta come with us." Now caves could mean trouble, currents, tight spaces, unpredictable critters. But the excitement on their faces reminded her of the times she'd gone exploring back home, lantern in hand, chasing the thrill of the unknown with friends who believed the world was wider than they'd ever imagined. She tightened the seals on her helmet, nodded, and said, "All right then, lead the way." They swam together, SpongeBob darting ahead like a golden spark, Patrick lumbering behind with steady flaps of his arms. Sandy kept pace between them, her suit hissing gently with each movement. The reef gave way to a stretch of darker water where the seafloor dipped into shadows. And there it was, a yawning opening in the rock, edges crusted with barnacles, as though the sea itself had tried to seal it, but couldn't quite manage. "See?" SpongeBob whispered, though his whisper was still loud enough to echo. "Doesn't it look mysterious?" Patrick nodded solemnly. "Very mysterious. I almost swallowed a rock just thinking about it." Sandy chuckled softly. "Well, let's have a look. But stay close, both of you. These places can be tricky." They slipped inside. The cave's walls glowed faintly with patches of bioluminescent algae, casting a gentle green light that danced with their movements. The air in Sandy's suit tasted cooler, sharper, as if the cave held its own breath. The deeper they went, the quieter it grew. No sound of currents, no chatter of distant fish, just the soft hum of their presence. SpongeBob's laughter broke the stillness as he pointed to shapes carved in the stone, spirals, waves, markings left by some ancient current of time. "It's like the cave's telling a story," he said, running his hand along the wall. Patrick tried to mimic the motion, tracing clumsy shapes, but his awe was no less genuine. Sandy studied the carvings. She didn't know their meaning, but she felt something in them, a reminder that the sea had held lives and stories long before she ever walked its floor. Her inventions, her dome, even her friendship with SpongeBob, all of it was part of a much larger tale. That thought filled her not with smallness, but with reverence. At the cave's heart, they found a pool of still water, perfectly round, its surface reflecting the algae's glow like a mirror. SpongeBob leaned over it wide-eyed. "It looks like magic," he whispered. "Or maybe it's just water," Patrick added, scratching his head. "Maybe it's both," Sandy murmured. She knelt beside the pool, her reflection gazing back at her from within the helmet. For a moment she imagined the surface breaking, another version of herself rising up, one that belonged wholly to the sea. SpongeBob reached into the pool, rippling the mirror. His reflection wavered, then reformed, grinning back at him. "See? It's friendly," he said, and his laughter filled the chamber. They spent what felt like hours there, SpongeBob inventing stories about the carvings, Patrick nodding along with every word, and Sandy quietly observing, her heart full. It wasn't the kind of adventure filled with peril or discovery of treasure. It was simpler, softer, a place where friendship itself became the treasure, a moment suspended in time, tucked safely in the folds of the sea. When at last they left the cave, the ocean outside seemed brighter, as if the world had leaned closer to listen to their laughter. SpongeBob and Patrick swam ahead, chattering about sandwiches and jellyfish nets, but Sandy lingered a moment at the cave's mouth. She placed her gloved hand against the stone, whispering a quiet thank you to whatever ancient current had carved those walls. Then she turned, following her friends into the sunlit water. As they moved together, Sandy realized something gentle but profound. Adventures weren't always about distance or discovery. Sometimes they were about presence, about sharing wonder with those who made even the smallest places feel infinite. And, in that truth, she felt the stirrings of something she hadn't known she was searching for. Not just belonging, but home. The days following the cave adventure were marked by a quiet excitement. Sandy had always known her inventions had purpose, but for the first time she saw them not only as tools for survival, but as companions for exploration, bridges between her world and the ocean's boundless mysteries. She began to work with a renewed focus, sketching designs that could move beyond her dome, imagining devices that could help SpongeBob and Patrick safely explore places they had only glimpsed from afar. Her first project was a simple yet ingenious one, a small submarine she called the Bubble Rover. Lightweight and maneuverable, it could glide silently through the water, protected by a reinforced dome that mimicked her own. She fashioned it from the scraps she had collected over months, pieces of metal, glass, and tubing, each fitted together with careful precision. When she finished, it was not flashy, nor was it loud, but it was perfect in its quiet functionality. SpongeBob was the first to test it. Sandy helped him into the cabin, tightening straps and checking valves while Patrick watched from above, bouncing with nervous enthusiasm. "You sure this thing won't explode?" Patrick asked, though his voice carried more wonder than worry. "Explode?" Sandy replied with a soft laugh. "Not unless it meets a volcano, buddy. You'll be fine." With a final twist of the controls, SpongeBob submerged, the Bubble Rover slipping beneath the waves with a gentle hiss. Sandy watched from the surface, holding her breath as the small craft glided past coral outcroppings, past shoals of curious fish. A few moments later, bubbles rose to the surface and SpongeBob's voice crackled through the communicator. "This is amazing, Sandy!" he shouted, his laughter echoing even through the device. "It's like flying underwater." Patrick clapped his hands, hopping up and down. "I want to go next! I want to go next!" Sandy smiled, carefully guiding Patrick into the rover. His excitement was infectious, and for a moment she allowed herself to forget the constant hum of the ocean, the quiet that had accompanied her for so long. She realized with a soft thrill that her inventions had become something more than machines. They were vessels for connection, for joy, for shared experience. Together, the trio explored parts of the reef Sandy had only ever approached from the dome. They discovered hidden tunnels carved by the tides, grottos filled with swaying anemones, and fields of starfish stretching farther than the eye could see. Sandy's careful planning and ingenuity kept them safe, but it was the laughter, the shouted instructions, the bubbles of delight that filled the water, that transformed these excursions into something magical. One afternoon, while navigating a particularly narrow passage, Sandy noticed something glinting in the sand, a piece of coral, shaped almost like a key, iridescent and delicate. She brought the rover to a gentle stop, pointing it out to SpongeBob. "See that?" she asked, reaching through the hatch to lift it carefully. SpongeBob's eyes widened. "Whoa, what do you think it is?" Patrick squinted, scratching his head. "Maybe it opens a treasure chest?" Sandy smiled, turning the coral in her hand. "Maybe it does," she said softly. "Or maybe it's a reminder that there's always something new to discover, even in places you think you know." It was a small lesson, but one that settled into her heart like a stone into sand. Her inventions, her friendships, her curiosity, they were all connected, threads in a web that stretched from her childhood fields to the ocean floor. Each adventure, no matter how minor, was a stitch in that tapestry, a reminder that growth was not just about leaving home, but about building something meaningful wherever you went. As the sun's rays filtered down through the water, illuminating the bubble rover and its small occupants, Sandy felt a quiet satisfaction. She had brought her past and her present together, crafting tools that allowed her to share her love for exploration, to nurture friendship, and to honor the whispers she had followed since childhood. When they returned to the dome that evening, dripping and laughing, Sandy set the rover aside and leaned against the glass. SpongeBob and Patrick ran off to explore a patch of glowing anemones, leaving her alone for a moment in the soft hum of her home. She let herself exhale fully, her chest light. The ocean outside remained vast, mysterious and alive, but inside the dome, Sandy realized she had carved a place for herself, not just a home, but a hub of connection, curiosity, and quiet wonder. And in that thought, she felt a gentle surge of pride, not in herself alone, but in what she had created for those she cared about most. The sea was no longer an empty expanse. It was a world that welcomed her, a place where invention, friendship, and wonder could flourish together. And Sandy, for the first time in her life, felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ocean, for all its beauty, had a way of reminding Sandy that even the gentlest currents could carry unforeseen challenges. One morning, as the light filtered down in slanting beams, she heard SpongeBob and Patrick laughing far beyond the dome. Curious, she peered through the glass and noticed them approaching a patch of reef she hadn't explored with them yet. The area looked harmless, almost serene, but Sandy's instincts told her to be cautious. She suited up, checked her instruments, and followed, the water cool and steady around her. SpongeBob waved frantically when he saw her, a grin plastered across his face. "You're just in time, Sandy," he bubbled. "Look what we found." Patrick floated beside him, pointing with a stubby arm at a cluster of strange, twisting rocks. Sandy studied the formation carefully. It was beautiful, almost sculptural, but her heart picked up a quiet warning. The rocks were layered in ways that suggested instability, and the current around them had an unpredictable swirl. "All right," Sandy said calmly, though her voice carried the tension she felt. "Let's examine it slowly." No sudden moves, the two friends nodded, though SpongeBob's eyes still shone with uncontainable curiosity. Together they swam closer, Sandy guiding the rover alongside them for support. She handed SpongeBob a small measuring device, a gadget she had built to detect shifts in current and water pressure. SpongeBob clicked it on and waved it over the rocks, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a while, the exploration went smoothly. They measured the crevices, traced the edges, and catalogued the strange shapes, their laughter mixing with Sandy's soft instructions. But then, without warning, a larger swirl of water surged around the formation, tugging at them. A small rock dislodged from the top, tumbling down like a tiny boulder, and SpongeBob squeaked, spinning sideways in the current. "Hold on!" Sandy shouted, reaching for him with gloved hands. Patrick flailed a moment behind, struggling to find balance. Using the rover's stabilizing thrusters, she created a barrier against the swirling current, holding the friends steady as the rock settled harmlessly against the seafloor. Her chest heaved slightly with relief. "That was exciting," Patrick said, his voice trembling a little, but his face still smiling. SpongeBob's grin returned, though tinged with a new respect. "Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I didn't know the ocean could do that." Sandy smiled softly, letting her fingers brush against the rover's controls. "It's a reminder," she said, "that even in places we know, there's always something new to learn." The sea is full of surprises. That's why we plan, measure, and use our heads before diving in. The trio continued their exploration, but Sandy stayed closer, keeping an eye on currents and shifting rocks. Adjusting her gadgets as needed, She realized that her inventions were not just about discovery or fun, they were about safety, about creating trust. SpongeBob and Patrick relied on her, and she felt a quiet responsibility that settled in her chest like a steady pulse. As the day progressed, they found more wonders, glowing anemones tucked into hidden cracks, a field of delicate sea flowers that swayed in unison, and a school of fish that shimmered like scattered jewels. Sandy paused at each discovery, jotting notes, adjusting her devices, and watching her friends' reactions. The joy in their faces made her heart swell, not just pride in her inventions, but a deeper satisfaction in seeing them share the thrill of exploration. By late afternoon, the current had calmed, and Sandy guided SpongeBob and Patrick back toward the dome. The trio floated side by side, laughter softening into comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sandy realized how much she had grown, from the girl tinkering alone beneath the Texas sky to an inventor whose creations carried friends safely through the unknown. She had learned that leadership wasn't about giving orders. It was about preparation, care, and the gentle confidence to guide others when the tide rose unexpectedly. When they returned, Sandy set the rover aside and floated in the water, watching SpongeBob and Patrick playfully chase bubbles. The dome glimmered behind her, a quiet beacon in the wide blue. For a moment, she let herself remember the fields of her childhood, the pecan trees swaying in the warm wind, the soft cicada hums. All of it, the past and the present, the land and the sea, felt connected, threads woven together by curiosity, courage, and care. And as the sun slanted lower through the waves, casting ribbons of gold across the seafloor, Sandy felt a deep contentment. There would be more challenges, she knew, currents stronger than these, dangers she had yet to anticipate, but she also knew she was ready. She had the tools, the friends, and the steady pulse of her own heart to guide her. The ocean was vast, unpredictable, and alive, but for the first time, it no longer felt overwhelming. Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick had faced it together, learning the quiet balance between adventure and caution, between curiosity and care. And in that shared experience, a new layer of trust and belonging had taken root, one that would grow with each passing day. The ocean, vast and ever-shifting, had become both a canvas and a laboratory for Sandy. After the small scare near the reef, she realized that her inventions could do more than protect. They could enhance life beneath the waves, opening doors to parts of the sea she had only imagined. The dome remained her anchor, but her mind was reaching further, sketching new designs and testing ideas that balanced safety, curiosity, and play. Her latest project was ambitious, an expansion to the dome that would allow her friends to enter safely, a space for exploration and learning alike. Sandy wanted it to be more than a shelter. She wanted it to be a home for discovery. She worked tirelessly, cutting, bending, and welding in her suit, the water around her hissing gently as she adjusted valves and sealed joints. Each panel of glass, each arc of steel, carried the precision and care of someone who knew the stakes. SpongeBob and Patrick were eager assistants, if a bit clumsy. Patrick's enthusiasm often collided with caution, sending tools spinning or bubbles rising in sudden clouds. SpongeBob was more attentive, following instructions with careful mimicry, yet his boundless energy sometimes required Sandy to redirect him. And yet, in every fumble, every misplaced tool, she found joy. The mistakes became part of the rhythm, part of the learning, and part of the laughter that now filled the dome more than silence ever had. One afternoon, as they assembled a reinforced airlock for her new entrance, a school of curious fish hovered nearby, inspecting the activity. SpongeBob clapped excitedly at each passing creature, narrating their imagined lives in tones so animated Sandy couldn't help but laugh. Patrick, meanwhile, had managed to tangle himself in a coil of tubing, his flailing limbs sending small bubbles spiraling upward. Sandy paused her work to untangle him, muttering under her breath with affectionate exasperation. "Patience," she said gently. "Engineering is as much about waiting as it is about moving fast." Patrick nodded solemnly, though Sandy suspected he didn't fully grasp the lesson. SpongeBob, however, had leaned forward, eyes wide, scribbling diagrams in the sand beneath the dome's edge. "I think I get it, Sandy," he said. "If we plan carefully, we can go anywhere." That phrase echoed in her mind long after the day's work was done. "Anywhere," she whispered to herself as she floated inside the dome, adjusting the last bolts on a sliding hatch. The ocean outside was calm now, the currents gentle, the light filtering down in long, soft shafts. Sandy allowed herself a moment of reflection, feeling the weight and the wonder of her journey. She had left home, mastered solitude, and found companionship in the unlikeliest of friends, and now her creations could carry them even further. The next test was for the Bubble Rover, now upgraded with small robotic arms and extended sensors. Sandy guided SpongeBob inside while Patrick supervised from the dome's glass wall, giving advice in his own, sometimes baffling way. The rover slipped beneath the waves, the reinforced hull holding steady against gentle currents. Sandy monitored pressure readings, adjusting controls and murmuring soft instructions. SpongeBob's voice came through the communicator, bubbling with excitement as he piloted the craft over coral towers and hidden caverns. At one point, they discovered a small cluster of sea urchins tucked between jagged rocks. SpongeBob leaned forward, curious, and Sandy carefully maneuvered the rover's arms to gently lift a few, moving them to safer terrain. "See," she said through the communicator, "exploration isn't just about seeing new things. It's about protecting them too." SpongeBob grinned. "Wow, we're like underwater heroes, Sandy." Patrick cheered from the dome, waving a tentacle. Sandy smiled, feeling a quiet warmth bloom in her chest. She had never imagined that her inventions would carry so much meaning, not just for survival, but for friendship, stewardship, and shared wonder. As the days passed, Sandy continued to refine her devices, expanding the dome and adding new features. Observation windows with magnification lenses, tethered bridges to the surrounding reefs, and small mechanical assistants to carry tools or samples. Each addition made the dome feel less like a solitary project and more like a collaborative space, a hub for learning and discovery. SpongeBob and Patrick took to helping in their own ways, learning patience and precision through trial and error. And in turn, Sandy learned to appreciate their joy, their laughter, and their perspective, which often reminded her that not every problem needed a perfect solution. Sometimes it simply needed care. One evening, after another long day of tinkering and testing, Sandy sat in the soft glow of the dome's lamps, watching bubbles rise lazily toward the surface. SpongeBob and Patrick were nearby, asleep in improvised hammocks, the gentle sway of the water rocking them. Sandy's heart swelled with quiet pride and contentment. She had built more than machines. She had built a home, a bridge, and a network of trust and wonder beneath the waves. The ocean outside continued its slow dance, indifferent and eternal, yet inside the dome, Sandy felt a profound connection. Her inventions were not just tools, they were extensions of her curiosity, care, and love for those she had chosen to share her life with. And in that knowledge, she allowed herself to rest, letting the hum of her creations and the soft breathing of her friends lull her into a peaceful quiet, ready for whatever new discoveries awaited. The morning was pale and quiet, the kind of soft light that slipped through the water like silk, settling over the reef in gentle ribbons. Sandy had woken early, as she always did, her mind already turning over plans for the day. Today was different, though. Today, she intended to lead SpongeBob and Patrick beyond the familiar reefs, to explore waters deeper and wider than any they had ventured before. Her dome, her inventions, and her careful planning had prepared them, but there was a thrill in the unknown that made her pulse quicken. SpongeBob arrived first, bouncing with his usual energy, his grin impossibly wide even beneath the water. Patrick floated in moments later, limbs outstretched, wobbling with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sandy watched them both with quiet amusement. Their enthusiasm was contagious, yet she knew the ocean could be unforgiving if respect was not paid to its currents and hidden hazards. "All right. Partners," Sandy began, adjusting the seals on her helmet. "We're heading into new territory today. Remember what we practiced. Slow movements, check the currents, and trust the equipment. And most importantly, stay close." SpongeBob saluted with one hand, his other waving so energetically it sent a small swirl of bubbles toward Sandy. Patrick tried to imitate, causing a ripple of laughter from both his friends. "We're ready, Sandy," SpongeBob shouted, bouncing on the spot. The journey began with the bubble rover, now upgraded with additional buoyancy stabilizers and extended sensors. Sandy guided the craft out of the dome's protective radius, past familiar coral towers and into open water. The light grew dimmer with each passing meter, filtering down in softer, colder shades of blue. Sandy could feel the weight of the sea pressing gently around them, a reminder that they were far from the comfort of home. As they ventured farther, the reef began to thin, replaced by open sand and scattered rock formations. Sandy's instruments beeped softly, monitoring pressure and current, while SpongeBob leaned over the controls, eyes wide in wonder. Patrick followed closely, occasionally bumping into the rover's edges, though Sandy's guidance kept them safe. "Look at that," SpongeBob whispered, pointing to a cavern carved deep into the rock face. The opening was shadowed and mysterious, framed by delicate spires of coral. "It's huge," Sandy nodded, her mind calculating angles, currents, and possible exits. "It's deep, but safe if we go slowly. Stay calm and keep close." They entered the cavern, the rover's lights illuminating the walls. Strange shapes danced in the corners of their vision, small, curious creatures peeking from crevices. Sandy's heart swelled with quiet awe. The ocean had a way of revealing wonders when approached with care and patience. Inside, they found a hidden pool of bioluminescent algae, glowing softly in the dim light. SpongeBob leaned forward, marveling at the gentle illumination, while Patrick gawked at the shimmering reflection on the water. Sandy floated beside them, her gloved hand brushing the control panel, adjusting the rover's arms to hold back delicate rocks that might fall. "This is incredible," SpongeBob murmured, voice hushed with reverence. "It's like magic," Sandy smiled softly. "Not magic," she said. "Just the ocean doing what it's always done. We're lucky enough to see it." The deeper they went, the more Sandy realized the challenge of navigation. Currents twisted unexpectedly through narrow passages, and small sandfalls threatened to block their path. Each time, Sandy relied on her instruments and experience, gently guiding the rover, reminding her friends to trust her lead. SpongeBob's wide-eyed excitement never waned, but Patrick's nervous glances reminded her that courage was often paired with apprehension. At the heart of the cavern, they discovered a hidden alcove, a hollow carved into the rock, filled with glowing stones that cast a kaleidoscope of colors on the walls. Sandy's breath caught even through her suit. She had never seen anything like it. This is what exploration is about," she whispered. "Finding beauty that's been waiting for someone patient enough to look." SpongeBob and Patrick floated beside her, their faces lit with awe. The moment was simple, yet profound, a quiet celebration of curiosity, trust, and shared wonder. Sandy realized that this was more than an adventure. It was a lesson in growth, friendship, and the rewards of careful preparation. When they returned to the dome that evening, the sun slanting softly through the water, Sandy felt a gentle pride. They had faced the unknown, relied on each other, and discovered something extraordinary together. The ocean was vast, mysterious, and occasionally challenging, but with careful planning, courage, and companionship, it revealed its wonders in the most unexpected places. As SpongeBob and Patrick laughed and recounted their favorite parts of the day, Sandy leaned against the glass of the dome, watching the light dance across the seafloor. She allowed herself a quiet exhale, a soft satisfaction settling into her chest. The ocean had tested them, yes, but it had also welcomed them. And Sandy, more than ever, felt at home in the delicate balance between curiosity, caution, and care. Would you like me to continue into Chapter 12, where Sandy begins experimenting with even more ambitious inventions, designed to explore the deeper reaches of the sea beyond the reef? The days following their first deep cavern expedition were filled with quiet preparation. Sandy spent hours sketching new designs, tinkering with components, and imagining the possibilities that lay beyond the familiar reefs. Her dome had become more than a home. It was a laboratory, a hub for ideas, experiments, and quiet contemplation. Each invention she built now carried not only her ingenuity, but the trust and curiosity of her friends, SpongeBob and Patrick, who had become as eager to explore as she was to guide them. Her latest creation was ambitious, a reinforced, semi-submersible exploration pod designed to travel farther and deeper than the Bubble rover. She worked methodically, testing each joint and valve, carefully calibrating buoyancy and pressure controls. The pod was smaller than the rover, more streamlined, yet equipped with robotic arms, observation windows, and storage compartments for specimens. It was a vessel that could carry her safely into unknown waters while allowing her friends to observe without risking harm. SpongeBob arrived first that morning, practically vibrating with excitement. "Sandy, is it ready yet?" he asked, his eyes sparkling. Patrick floated in slowly, tilting his head from side to side. "Will it let me ride?"
"I don't want to get lost again."
Sandy smiled beneath her helmet, checking the final seals on the pod's hatch. "It's ready," she said gently. "But remember, we move carefully. This pod can take us farther than ever before, but the ocean has its own rules. We respect them, and we'll come back safe." The friends climbed in, SpongeBob taking the front seat and Patrick hovering near the side hatch, while Sandy guided the pod through the water with a steady hand. The familiar reefs slipped away behind them, replaced by open sand and scattered coral outcrops. The light dimmed as they descended, filtering through the water in long, soft rays. Sandy felt a quiet thrill, the kind that came from stepping beyond boundaries, trusting both her skills and her inventions to carry them into the unknown. They soon reached a deep trench, its shadowed walls curling downwards like a canyon carved over centuries. SpongeBob's eyes widened.
"Whoa, it's huge,"
he whispered, his voice bubbling with awe. Patrick's mouth fell open in quiet astonishment. Sandy guided the pod carefully, keeping an eye on sensors and instruments. The trench was alive with subtle movement, small creatures darting between rocks, delicate plants swaying in invisible currents, and faint glows from bioluminescent life tucked in crevices. Sandy marveled quietly, noting how the deeper they went, the more the ocean revealed its hidden wonders. At one point, a gentle current shifted unexpectedly, pushing the pod toward a narrow passage. Sandy adjusted the thrusters, keeping the pod steady, and glanced at SpongeBob and Patrick. Both were wide-eyed but calm, their trust in her evident. She realized in that moment how far they had all come, from cautious friends exploring shallow reefs to companions capable of facing the unknown together. As they moved deeper, they discovered a series of ledges covered in rare coral formations, each glowing faintly with soft blues and greens. Sandy paused to observe, extending the pod's robotic arms to collect small samples without disturbing the delicate environment. SpongeBob and Patrick watched in fascination, asking questions and marveling at the care with which she handled each piece. It was a moment of quiet wonder, shared in a way words alone could never convey. Suddenly a shadow moved across the trench wall, a large, graceful silhouette that passed just beyond the pod's lights.
SpongeBob gasped.
"What is that?" Sandy studied the readings carefully. It was a gentle, enormous creature gliding effortlessly along the trench, its movement hypnotic in the dim light.
"It's harmless," she said softly.
"Just a visitor. We're lucky to see it." Patrick leaned close to the glass, mesmerized.
"It's beautiful," he breathed. Sandy allowed herself a moment to reflect.
Each expedition, each invention, each shared experience had brought them closer, not just as friends, but as explorers bound together by curiosity, care, and trust. She realized that the ocean was no longer just a place of work or solitude. It had become a living classroom, a vast landscape of lessons, challenges, and quiet revelations. When they returned to the dome that evening, the soft glow of the lamps greeted them like old friends. SpongeBob and Patrick tumbled out, chattering excitedly about everything they had seen, while Sandy followed, her mind replaying the day's discoveries. She felt a profound satisfaction, not in triumph or conquest, but in the gentle unfolding of knowledge, connection, and shared wonder. Later, as the pod rested in its docking bay, and the friends settled into hammocks, swaying gently in the current, Sandy floated by the glass, watching the ocean outside. The trench, the glowing coral, the quiet movements of the deep, they were all pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. And in that quiet reflection, she felt the steady pull of home, not just the dome, not just her inventions, but the bond she had nurtured with her friends and with the sea itself. The ocean remained vast and unpredictable, yet for the first time, Sandy felt wholly part of it. With careful planning, inventive spirit, and the laughter and trust of SpongeBob and Patrick, she had discovered not just wonders beneath the waves, but a deep, abiding sense of belonging. The ocean had a way of keeping secrets, and Sandy had always known it. Even after months of exploration and invention, she felt as though the deeper waters held stories that had yet to reveal themselves. One morning, while inspecting the outskirts of a distant reef, she noticed an unusual formation, a labyrinth of jagged rock, twisting tunnels, and hidden passageways that seemed to disappear into shadows. Sandy's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with curiosity. SpongeBob arrived first, practically vibrating with excitement.
"Sandy, look at this. It's huge. Can we explore it?"
Patrick floated in after, tilting his head back and forth.
"Is it safe? I don't want to get lost again."
Sandy smiled beneath her helmet, adjusting the seals on her suit. "It's safe if we take it slow. That's the key. Patience, observation, and trusting each other." The trio set off, Sandy guiding them with calm precision. The labyrinth was alive in subtle ways, small fish darting between crevices, plants swaying gently, and faint glimmers of bioluminescence illuminating the darker corners. Sandy's pod followed, sensors flickering to monitor currents, water pressure, and the stability of the labyrinth walls. As they ventured deeper, the tunnels twisted and turned unpredictably. Sandy carefully marked their path with small luminescent markers, a trail to guide them back. SpongeBob's voice bubbled with delight at every new turn, and Patrick occasionally bumped into walls or tumbled into small alcoves, eliciting laughter from both Sandy and SpongeBob. "This is amazing,"
SpongeBob whispered. "It's like a giant puzzle made by the ocean."
Sandy nodded, smiling softly. "Every twist and turn tells a story. The currents carved these passages over centuries. We're just visitors, learning what the sea wants to show us." At one point, they reached a chamber where a faint glow shimmered from beneath the sand. Sandy lowered the pod's robotic arm, gently uncovering a cluster of translucent stones, each pulsing with soft light. SpongeBob leaned forward, eyes wide, and Patrick floated closer, mesmerized. Whoa.
They're like hearts, Patrick murmured. Not hearts, Sandy said softly.
But a reminder that even in the deepest, darkest places life can shine. She carefully collected a few stones for observation, ensuring the rest remained undisturbed. It was a delicate balance, exploration without interference, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in maintaining it. As they moved through another winding passage, the currents shifted unexpectedly, pushing the pod sideways. Sandy adjusted the thrusters quickly, holding the craft steady. SpongeBob's laughter faltered for a moment, replaced by wide-eyed concentration, while Patrick clung nervously to a railing Sandy had installed.
It's tricky here, she murmured.
Stay close, trust the pod, and follow my lead. Deeper still, they discovered a hidden alcove where the walls seemed carved into intricate patterns, faintly echoing the currents above. Sandy paused, studying the formations. They were natural, yet precise in a way that suggested ages of slow, patient shaping. SpongeBob traced his finger along one curve, his voice low and reverent.
It's beautiful.
Like it's telling a story without words, Patrick nodded solemnly.
Yeah.
The ocean's smart, Sandy chuckled softly, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. Every journey, every invention, every small triumph had brought them closer, not just to understanding the ocean, but to each other. SpongeBob's boundless energy, Patrick's simple wonder, and her own careful curiosity created a rhythm of exploration, trust, and shared discovery. The labyrinth tested them gently, but consistently. Narrow passages, subtle currents, and unexpected drops required them to rely on both equipment and intuition. Sandy guided the pod with calm expertise, while SpongeBob and Patrick learned to read the water, anticipate movements, and act with patience. With each challenge, their confidence grew, not in bravado, but in careful, considered courage. By the time they emerged from the labyrinth, the ocean outside seemed brighter, almost welcoming in a new way. Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, her heart light with the knowledge that they had navigated the unknown together. SpongeBob bounced excitedly, recounting the twists and turns, while Patrick nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by the subtle lessons of the deep. As they returned to the dome, Sandy felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It wasn't the discovery of treasure, nor the thrill of danger. It was the quiet mastery of patience, trust, and careful observation. The labyrinth had given them something more, a deeper understanding of the ocean, of each other, and of the careful balance between curiosity and caution. Later, as the friends settled into hammocks, swaying gently in the current, Sandy floated beside the glass, watching the deep water shimmer in fading light. The labyrinth lay behind them, a hidden world preserved, a story told in silence. She realized that the ocean, with all its vastness and mystery, had become a teacher, patient, enduring, and endlessly generous. And Sandy, in the quiet of the dome, felt at peace. She had discovered not just the labyrinth, but the joy of shared wonder, the strength of friendship, and the gentle thrill of venturing beyond what was known. The ocean had a rhythm, one that Sandy had grown to feel in her bones. Its currents whispered lessons in patience, its depths offered quiet revelations, and its hidden corners challenged her to imagine beyond what she already knew. After the labyrinth, Sandy knew she was ready for something more ambitious, an invention that would allow her to explore both the vertical and horizontal extremes of the sea, reaching depths and distances she had only dreamed about. She called it the Deep Diver Pod, a combination of reinforced hull, adjustable buoyancy chambers, and retractable arms for collecting samples and navigating tight spaces. It was her most complex creation yet, a reflection of her growing confidence, her ingenuity, and the trust she had nurtured with SpongeBob and Patrick. Every component was meticulously tested, every seal double-checked, and every instrument calibrated to the highest precision. SpongeBob arrived first one morning, practically vibrating with excitement.
Sandy, is it ready? Can we go deeper than ever?
His voice bubbled through the water, brimming with curiosity and impatience. Patrick floated in, slowly twisting himself in place. "Will it be safe?" he asked, more cautious than usual.
I don't want to get squished by ocean stuff, Sandy chuckled softly beneath her helmet.
"It's safe if we follow the plan. Remember, patience, observation, and trust. That's how we explore safely." She guided them into the pod, securing them with gentle but firm straps. SpongeBob practically bounced in his seat, while Patrick fidgeted nervously. As the deep diver pod descended, the ocean transformed around them. Light dwindled gradually, soft beams refracting off the pod's reinforced glass, illuminating the surrounding water in muted blues and greens. Sandy monitored instruments closely, adjusting depth controls to maintain stability. SpongeBob's wide-eyed gaze swept across the scene, while Patrick clutched a handrail. Trembling slightly, but trusting Sandy's guidance, they reached the first vertical extreme, a sheer drop into the abyss. Sandy paused, allowing the pod to hover in place as currents swept past. "This is where patience matters most," she murmured. "The ocean moves in ways we can't always predict. Watch and feel it." SpongeBob leaned forward, mesmerized.
"It's endless," he whispered.
"Like the world keeps going even when we can't see it." Patrick's eyes widened.
"Kind of scary, but
"Kinda awesome too," he admitted. Sandy smiled beneath her helmet. The pod's sensors detected subtle shifts in pressure and current. Using the robotic arms, she gently maneuvered samples of deep-sea flora and delicate rock formations. Each motion was deliberate, precise, ensuring they disturbed nothing unnecessarily. SpongeBob and Patrick watched in quiet awe, realizing the ocean demanded respect, not just excitement. As they moved horizontally along the trench floor, the pod's lights revealed strange and wonderful creatures. Translucent jellyfish drifting lazily, tiny crustaceans scuttling over rocks, and bioluminescent organisms that glowed faintly, like stars fallen into water. Sandy made careful notes, capturing the patterns of life that existed in these extremes. SpongeBob whispered observations, fascinated by the ecosystem, while Patrick asked questions in his own curious way. Deeper still, the pod encountered a series of underwater caves, their entrances obscured by shadow and current. Sandy guided the pod with steady hands, teaching her friends how to read subtle signs, the sway of anemones, the direction of sediment flows, the faint hum of distant water movement. Each lesson was gentle, shared through experience rather than instruction. Inside the caves, they found hidden chambers filled with delicate mineral formations glowing softly in the pod's lights. SpongeBob's voice echoed through the communicator. "It's like the ocean is showing us its secrets, Sandy." "Yes," Sandy replied softly.
"But only because we're paying attention."
"That's what exploration really is, seeing what's there, respecting it, and learning without rushing." The pod's descent continued for hours, traversing vertical cliffs, narrow passages, and wide sandy plains. Sandy felt a quiet pride, not in conquering the ocean, but in navigating it with care, curiosity, and thoughtfulness. SpongeBob and Patrick, once hesitant, moved with increasing confidence, their laughter and whispers punctuating the silence in a way that felt like music. Eventually, they surfaced near the dome, the sunlight filtering through the water like long ribbons of gold. Sandy guided the pod gently back to its dock, allowing her friends to stretch and float freely. SpongeBob bounced in place, recounting every detail with boundless energy, while Patrick nodded along, clearly impressed by the day's discoveries. Sandy watched them, a quiet warmth filling her chest. Her inventions were more than tools. They were bridges between the known and the unknown, between caution and curiosity, between friends. The ocean was vast, sometimes daunting, but with patience, trust, and careful observation, it revealed itself in beauty, mystery, and quiet wonder. That evening, as the friends settled into hammocks, swaying gently in the dome's current, Sandy floated by the glass, watching the light fade across the reef. She felt a profound contentment. The deep diver pod had not only carried them farther than ever before, it had brought them closer together, deepening trust, curiosity, and a shared sense of wonder. The ocean had begun to feel like an old friend to Sandy, familiar in its moods, rhythms, and hidden corners, yet it still held mysteries that made her pulse quicken with quiet anticipation. After the deep diver pod expedition, Sandy realized there were stories buried in the depths, histories written not in words, but in currents, formations, and the subtle choreography of life below the surface. One morning, she set out with SpongeBob and Patrick, guided by faint readings from her instruments, traces of unusual mineral formations and currents that hinted at hidden structures far beyond the familiar reefs. SpongeBob bounced excitedly as they approached the designated coordinates. "Sandy, what do you think we'll find today?" he asked, his voice bubbling with wonder. Patrick floated close, eyes wide. "Are we going to see, like, ancient stuff?
Like old ocean castles?
Sandy smiled beneath her helmet, her heart lightened by their excitement. "Maybe not castles," she said gently, "but something just as interesting. The ocean remembers things we've yet to see, and today we might catch a glimpse of those memories." The trio slipped into the pod, and Sandy guided it through the gently darkening water. As they descended, the familiar light of the surface faded into soft, muted blues, and then a faint, eerie glow began to shimmer from deeper down. The currents carried a subtle hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate through the pod itself. SpongeBob leaned forward, mesmerized, while Patrick floated nervously near the rear hatch. "Do you feel that?" SpongeBob whispered. "I do," Sandy murmured, adjusting the sensors. "There's something here, something older than we can imagine. But we'll move carefully." The pod reached the edge of a vast trench, its walls carved into strange, undulating shapes that hinted at a hand, or perhaps nature's patient touch over centuries. Sandy guided the craft closer, observing delicate lines in the rock and clusters of mineral deposits that glimmered faintly in the pod's lights. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of uncovering something extraordinary. SpongeBob leaned toward the observation window, his wide eyes reflecting the glow.
"It's beautiful," he whispered.
Patrick nodded solemnly beside him, surprisingly quiet, clearly sensing the weight of the discovery. Sandy extended the pod's robotic arms carefully, touching the surfaces without disturbing them. Some were smooth, polished by centuries of currents. Others were jagged, shaped by the slow, persistent movement of sand and water. Each detail was a story, a record of time, pressure, and the life that had passed through here long before them. As they moved further into the trench, the walls opened into a hidden cavern. Inside, faint patterns shimmered on the rock, almost like symbols, but too subtle to be man-made. Sandy paused, letting the pod hover. The glow intensified, illuminating delicate shapes that reminded her of the forest floor from her childhood, sunlight dancing through leaves, only now translated into water and stone.
These have been here for centuries," she murmured, her voice soft and reverent.
The ocean carries its history quietly. We're seeing it now, but only because we're paying attention. SpongeBob pressed his face closer to the glass.
"It's magical," he breathed.
Patrick reached out with a tentative finger, pressing against the window as if trying to touch the memory itself. Sandy's chest swelled with a quiet pride, not in discovery alone, but in the shared wonder. This was why she built, why she explored, why she invited her friends into the unknown. They weren't just observing the ocean, they were honoring it, learning to move with it, and finding beauty in patience and care. The pod's sensors detected a subtle shift in the current, and Sandy adjusted controls to maintain stability. Small particles swirled around them, tiny fragments of ancient sediment lifting into the light. For a moment, the cavern felt suspended in time, a quiet monument to the deep, hidden life of the ocean. "Do you think anyone else has seen this?" SpongeBob asked softly. Sandy shook her head gently. "Maybe, maybe not. But what matters is that we're here now, learning, respecting, and appreciating. That's the real treasure." They spent hours documenting the cavern, taking careful samples, and observing the faintly glowing minerals. Sandy felt a deep connection, not just to the ocean but to time itself, to the patient processes that shaped everything around them. SpongeBob and Patrick, once hesitant explorers, now moved with quiet reverence, their laughter replaced by soft, awed whispers as the pod ascended toward the dome. Sunlight returned, filtering down in long, golden shafts. Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, a sense of contentment spreading through her chest. They had discovered something remarkable, but more importantly, they had learned to see with care, to explore with respect, and to share the experience fully with one another. Back in the dome, the friends floated quietly, reflecting on what they had witnessed. Sandy realized that exploration was more than adventure. It was connection to history, to nature, and to the companions who shared the journey. The ocean had revealed a secret, and in turn had reminded them of the quiet power of wonder, patience,
And trust. The ocean seemed to hum with quiet anticipation as Sandy prepared for another descent.
The deep diver pod polished and checked for every contingency. After uncovering the hidden cavern and its ancient glowing patterns, she sensed the sea was ready to share more of its secrets. This time, the readings on her instruments hinted at something extraordinary. A small, enclosed ecosystem tucked between cliffs and trenches, a place untouched and preserved by the currents. SpongeBob arrived first,
Practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes wide and sparkling. Sandy, do you think we'll see new creatures today?
Patrick floated in more slowly, tilting his head from side to side.
Will it be safe? I don't want to get squished by anything. Ancient again, he muttered nervously. Sandy chuckled beneath her helmet.
"It's safe if we take it slow, Patrick. Remember, patience, observation, and trust. That's how we explore safely." They climbed into the pod, and Sandy guided it toward the coordinates with careful precision. As they descended, the light from above dimmed gradually, shifting the water around them into cool blues and greens. Shadows lengthened, and faint glimmers appeared from small, unseen creatures, like stars scattered across the depths. SpongeBob pressed his face against the observation window,
Mesmerized while Patrick clung to a handrail.
trembling slightly, but trusting Sandy's guidance. The pod approached a narrow passage, opening into a hidden alcove. Sandy's instruments indicated subtle currents and a rich concentration of life. She maneuvered the pod slowly, extending its robotic arms to gently test the surrounding waters without disturbing the delicate balance. Immediately, a dazzling array of creatures appeared. Translucent fish with delicate fins, bioluminescent plankton swirling in hypnotic patterns, and small crustaceans that scuttled across the rocky outcrops in perfect synchronicity. SpongeBob's voice bubbled with awe.
Sandy, it's like a whole new world down here. It's alive in ways I've never imagined.
Patrick floated closer, mouth slightly open.
It's beautiful.
Like the ocean made a secret garden, Sandy smiled beneath her helmet.
Exactly. And we're lucky enough to see it.
But we must move carefully. Even the smallest disturbance could change everything. They floated through the ecosystem, noting unusual coral formations, small caves, and clusters of glowing algae. Sandy gently collected a few samples with the pod's robotic arms, storing them in secure compartments while leaving the rest untouched. SpongeBob and Patrick observed silently, understanding the importance of care and respect in exploration. At one point, the pod entered a wider chamber where currents shifted more unpredictably. Sandy adjusted the thrusters to maintain stability, guiding the craft through the delicate passages. Tiny particles of sand and sediment swirled in the water, creating an ethereal, dreamlike effect. SpongeBob's eyes widened as he watched, captivated by the interplay of light and motion. This place.
It feels alive, SpongeBob whispered.
Like it's breathing around us, Patrick nodded solemnly. Yeah, like it's watching us too. Sandy allowed herself a quiet smile. She felt the same way. This ecosystem was fragile, ancient, and full of wisdom, preserved in ways humans could never fully understand. She realized that exploration was not about domination or conquest, but about connection, observation, and gentle discovery. They followed a small channel deeper into the hidden ecosystem, revealing even more wonders, clusters of delicate, glowing anemones, small schools of fish that moved in synchrony as if performing a silent dance, and hidden caves where shadows hinted at life just beyond sight. Sandy guided the pod carefully, documenting every discovery and teaching her friends how to notice subtle cues in the environment. The sway of plants, the direction of currents, the patterns of movement among creatures. Hours passed in quiet observation. SpongeBob and Patrick grew more comfortable, moving with a newfound awareness that came from trust and shared experience. Sandy felt a profound satisfaction, not in discovery alone, but in the bond that had strengthened among them, and in the quiet reverence for a world so delicately balanced. As the pod began its ascent toward the dome, the faint light of the sun returned, filtering through the water in soft, golden beams. Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, a sense of contentment settling into her chest. They had witnessed a hidden world, learned from it, and left it intact. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, reflecting on the day's discoveries. Sandy watched them, heart full, understanding that exploration was not only about uncovering mysteries, but also about the shared experience of wonder, trust, and care. The ocean had revealed another of its secrets, and in turn had taught them the quiet power of patience, observation, and companionship. Later, as the friends settled into their hammocks, swaying gently in the dome's current, Sandy gazed through the glass at the shimmering blue beyond. The hidden ecosystem remained untouched, a testament to time, patience, and the subtle guidance of those who explored it with respect. She realized that each expedition, each careful maneuver, and each shared moment had brought them closer, not only to the ocean, but to understanding themselves and each other. The ocean had begun to feel alive in ways Sandy had only sensed before. Each current, each shimmer of light, seemed to carry messages, lessons, and glimpses of a world older and wiser than anyone could imagine. After discovering the hidden ecosystem, she felt a quiet anticipation, as if the sea itself had a secret it was ready to share. Today, she would find something new, something that required patience, observation, and gentle care. SpongeBob arrived first, practically vibrating with energy.
Sandy, are we going to see something?
Different today? Patrick floated in behind him, eyes wide with curiosity and a touch of nervousness. Do you think it's safe? He asked.
I don't want to get squished by...
Weird creatures again? Sandy chuckled beneath her helmet. It's safe, Patrick, as long as we follow the plan. Remember, slow movements, careful observation, and trust. That's how we explore. They climbed into the deep diver pod, its hull gleaming under the dome's soft lights. Sandy checked every seal, every valve, every instrument before guiding the pod gently through the water. As they descended, the sunlight faded into muted shades of blue, and the ocean began to thrum with a subtle vibration, like a pulse beneath the waves. SpongeBob leaned forward, eyes wide, while Patrick clutched a handrail, trembling slightly, but trusting Sandy's guidance. Their instruments indicated unusual movement ahead, a pattern too precise to be random, too synchronized to be merely accidental. Sandy adjusted the pod's lights, revealing a small group of creatures unlike anything they had seen before. They were delicate, translucent, and glowed faintly, moving with a rhythm that seemed almost intentional, as if communicating silently with one another. SpongeBob pressed his face to the window, eyes sparkling. "Sandy, they're beautiful. Look at how they move together." Patrick floated closer, whispering in awe.
It's like they're dancing or talking underwater. Sandy's heart swelled with quiet wonder.
Exactly. Watch carefully. They're coordinated, but it's subtle. There's a pattern here, a kind of intelligence that doesn't need words. The pod drifted alongside the creatures, and Sandy extended the robotic arms just enough to take measurements and record observations without disturbing them. The creatures responded gently, altering their movements as the pod passed, but never in panic or aggression. SpongeBob's voice bubbled with excitement. "They know we're here, but they trust us." Patrick nodded slowly, mesmerized.
It's like
The ocean made friends with them, and now we're friends too. Sandy smiled beneath her helmet. The realization struck her. This wasn't just a discovery of a new species. It was a lesson in trust, observation, and respect. The creatures' coordinated behavior suggested intelligence, subtle communication, and a deep awareness of their surroundings. To Sandy, it was as if the ocean itself was teaching them patience, attentiveness, and reverence for life's quiet complexity. They followed the creatures for several minutes, documenting their movements, noting how they navigated small obstacles, shared space, and adjusted to currents. SpongeBob asked questions constantly, trying to understand the patterns while Patrick watched in silence, absorbing the moment with childlike awe. At one point, a gentle current shifted unexpectedly, and the creatures formed a protective circle around one of their own that had been caught in the flow. Sandy marveled at the coordination. "See that?" she said softly.
they care for one another.
Cooperation, trust, and awareness, lessons we can carry too. SpongeBob's eyes shone with understanding.
It's like they're teaching us without words.
Patrick whispered, almost reverently. The ocean. It's smart.
Really smart. After several hours of careful observation, Sandy guided the pod back toward open water.
The creatures lingered, gliding slowly as if waving farewell before fading into the deeper blue. SpongeBob and Patrick were quiet now, both absorbed in reflection, understanding that what they had witnessed was rare, fragile and precious. When they returned to the dome, Sandy felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had not only discovered a new species, but had also shared with her friends a lesson in patience, respect, and quiet intelligence. Exploration was not about conquering or collecting. It was about seeing, understanding, and honoring the life that surrounded them. Later, as SpongeBob and Patrick floated in the gentle current, recounting moments of fascination in soft tones, Sandy gazed through the dome's glass at the ocean beyond. The creatures had vanished into the depths, but their subtle patterns lingered in her mind, a reminder that the ocean's wisdom was patient, enduring, and always ready to teach those willing to observe. She realized that every expedition, every invention, and every careful maneuver had brought them closer to understanding not just the sea, but the delicate threads that connected life, curiosity, and trust. And in that quiet, reflective moment, Sandy felt a deep, abiding peace, the knowledge that the ocean's mysteries were endless, and that the true joy of discovery lay in shared wonder, careful observation, and gentle care. The ocean held its secrets tightly, but Sandy had learned that patience, curiosity, and careful observation could coax even the deepest mysteries into view. After discovering the delicate, intelligent species, she sensed that the sea was ready to reveal something even older, something carved by time and memory rather than nature alone. Today's expedition was different. It was not just about life or currents. It was about history, hidden in stone and shadow beneath the waves. SpongeBob arrived first, practically vibrating with excitement. Sandy!
Do you think we'll find, like, ancient stuff today?
Patrick floated in slowly, tilting his head from side to side.
Like sunken castles or buried treasures?
He asked nervously. Sandy chuckled beneath her helmet. Maybe not castles, Patrick, she said gently, but something just as interesting. The ocean holds traces of civilizations long gone, and today we might glimpse one of them. The trio climbed into the deep diver pod, its hull gleaming under the dome's soft lights. Sandy double-checked every seal and valve, making sure the instruments were calibrated for careful observation rather than speed. They descended slowly, leaving the bright surface light behind, the water around them deepening into muted blues and greens. SpongeBob pressed his face to the observation window, while Patrick clutched a handrail nervously, trusting Sandy's steady guidance. After some time, the pod reached an unusual formation, a wide, flat area of stone covered with intricate carvings. Sandy's instruments confirmed the pattern was not natural. The marks were deliberate, geometric, and consistent, hinting at intelligence and purpose. SpongeBob gasped, his eyes wide. Whoa.
Sandy, it's like somebody was here a long time ago.
Patrick floated closer, his voice hushed. It's
spooky, but
cool. Sandy guided the pod carefully along the surface, adjusting the lights to reveal more details. The carvings were complex, spirals, straight lines, and shapes that suggested architecture long since eroded by time and current. Small nooks and alcoves indicated that these stones may have been part of a larger structure, perhaps an underwater settlement or ceremonial site. These markings,
they're incredible, Sandy whispered.
This isn't just nature, it's history. Someone, or something, shaped this place long ago. SpongeBob's eyes sparkled with curiosity.
Do you think we could figure out what it was used for?
Patrick tilted his head, scanning the stones. Maybe it's a library or a place where fish
had parties.
Sandy laughed softly. Maybe not parties, Patrick, but we can observe, record, and learn. That's our best way to understand it. The pod drifted closer to the carvings, and Sandy extended the robotic arms to gently trace the etched surfaces, collecting small samples of mineral deposits for study while leaving the majority untouched. SpongeBob and Patrick leaned forward, mesmerized as Sandy explained the importance of respect and careful observation. Each movement was deliberate, teaching her friends that exploration was as much about restraint as it was about discovery. Deeper into the site, they discovered collapsed walls partially buried under centuries of sediment. Tiny crustaceans and bioluminescent plankton moved through the cracks, adding life to the silent ruins.
SpongeBob whispered in awe. It's like the city is sleeping.
Waiting for someone to remember it, Patrick nodded slowly. Yeah.
It feels quiet.
But alive. Sandy allowed herself a soft smile. The ruins were more than a discovery. They were a connection to something older, a reminder that the ocean was both a cradle and a keeper of memory. The careful movements of her pod, the delicate sampling, and the attention to detail allowed them to witness the site without disturbing its quiet dignity. As they explored the larger chamber, Sandy noticed a series of faint carvings that resembled a map, etched in subtle lines and patterns. SpongeBob and Patrick leaned closer, trying to decipher the shapes. Sandy studied it carefully, tracing the lines with the robotic arm. The map suggested pathways through the surrounding seabed, an ancient guide preserved by the ocean waiting to be seen. This could lead to more, Sandy murmured softly. Other structures, other stories. We've only just scratched the surface. Hours passed as they documented, photographed, and recorded every detail. SpongeBob's excitement was tempered by reverence, while Patrick absorbed the quiet wonder with thoughtful expressions. Sandy felt a deep, profound satisfaction, not in conquest, but in the gentle unfolding of history and life beneath the waves. As they ascended toward the dome, sunlight returned, casting long golden rays into the water. Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, a sense of accomplishment settling over her. They had uncovered something extraordinary, but more importantly, they had preserved it. The ocean had shared a secret, and they had witnessed it with care, respect, and shared wonder. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, still reflecting on the silent city below. Sandy watched them, feeling the weight and joy of what they had discovered. Exploration was no longer just a thrill. It was connection, observation, and reverence for the mysteries of the deep. The ocean had revealed a fragment of its past, and through careful study and shared presence, they had honored it. The ocean seemed to pulse with a quiet, patient energy as Sandy guided the deep diver pod back toward the ruins. The carvings and collapsed walls of the ancient underwater city had left her mind alight with questions. What kind of beings had inhabited this place? How had they lived, worked, and survived beneath the waves? And most importantly, had they left behind traces of knowledge that could still teach us something today?
SpongeBob floated ahead in his excitement, practically bouncing in the pod. Sandy! Do you think there's, secret gadgets or machines down there?
Patrick tilted his head, his voice slow and careful. Do you think the ocean kept them safe all this time? Sandy chuckled softly beneath her helmet. Maybe not machines exactly, Patrick, but the ocean does preserve things. Sometimes knowledge can be hidden in objects, patterns, or structures, waiting for someone to notice. They approached a section of the ruins that Sandy had marked on her previous expedition. The carvings here were more precise, almost symmetrical, unlike the flowing shapes of the other parts. There were smooth surfaces embedded with small cavities and faint lines that hinted at mechanisms long forgotten. Sandy's pulse quickened. This was unlike anything she had seen before in her underwater explorations. It was deliberate, purposeful, almost technological. SpongeBob leaned close to the glass, eyes wide.
Sandy, is it alive? Patrick's voice trembled slightly.
Or is it sleeping? Sandy smiled softly. Not alive like a fish or a plant.
But it's
preserved knowledge. Someone crafted this to do something long ago. We just have to figure out what. The pod hovered above the stone platform, sensors scanning the surface carefully. Sandy extended the robotic arms, touching one of the cavities. A small panel shifted slightly under the pressure, revealing an intricate pattern of gears and levers etched into the stone. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from quiet exhilaration. These
are functional mechanisms, she whispered.
Designed to move, to operate, even after centuries underwater. SpongeBob pressed a hand to the window, mesmerized.
They're amazing.
Like the ocean made them alive with
magic? Patrick's jaw dropped. Do you think they'll work? Sandy shook her head gently.
We have to be careful.
The ocean preserved this, but it's fragile.
One wrong move could damage it. She guided the pod to a more stable position, extending the arms carefully to study each cavity, lever, and etched gear. SpongeBob and Patrick watched quietly, realizing that discovery wasn't about rushing, but about patience and attention to detail. Sandy noted the patterns and how the mechanisms might interact. Some seemed designed to open hidden compartments, others to trigger movements within the structure. It was a sophisticated system, built with knowledge and purpose, that had survived the ocean's slow erosion. As she explored further, a faint glow appeared from a series of nested cavities. Sandy adjusted the pod's lights, revealing translucent panels that refracted the soft illumination of the pod's instruments. It was as though the structure was waiting for recognition, for someone to understand the patterns and restore their meaning. See that?
Sandy murmured.
It's subtle, but it's there. Whoever built this knew the ocean would preserve it, and they designed it to survive quietly, hidden in plain sight. SpongeBob's voice was barely a whisper.
It's like a treasure.
But not gold.
Knowledge.
Like a secret the ocean wants us to learn. Patrick nodded slowly. Yeah, we just have to be gentle. Hours passed as Sandy carefully mapped the mechanisms, recording the details in her instruments and sketching them for later analysis. She explained each discovery to SpongeBob and Patrick, showing how small movements in one lever could influence patterns elsewhere, how pressure points and geometry interacted with the flow of water, and how precision had been built into every inch of the structure. When the pod finally ascended toward the dome, Sandy felt a quiet sense of awe and accomplishment. They had not only discovered remnants of an ancient civilization, but had glimpsed its ingenuity and foresight. The ocean had preserved knowledge that transcended time, and they had honored it through careful study, respect, and shared curiosity. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated silently, absorbing the significance of what they had seen. Sandy gazed through the glass at the faint shimmer of the ruins below, her mind alive with possibilities. The ancient mechanisms were more than relics. They were lessons in patience, ingenuity, and the quiet power of careful observation. She realized that the joy of exploration was not in possession, but in understanding, in connection, and in the subtle, profound wisdom hidden in the world around them. The ocean had revealed its secret gently, and in turn, it had taught them a lesson in wonder, respect, and the timeless magic of knowledge preserved beneath the waves. The ocean had a way of rewarding patience with revelation, and Sandy felt that pulse of understanding as the deep diver pod hovered above the ancient mechanisms. Every etched gear, every faint cavity, and every nested panel seemed to hum with purpose, as if waiting for recognition, waiting for a careful hand to coax it back to life. Today, Sandy would do just that, not recklessly, but with the precision, patience, and respect that the ocean demanded. SpongeBob floated in first, practically vibrating with excitement.
Sandy, are we really going to try it today?
Are we going to see the mechanisms move? Patrick followed slowly, eyes wide with a mix of wonder and nervousness. Do you think
It's safe? I mean, it's ancient.
Sandy smiled softly beneath her helmet. It's safe if we move carefully, Patrick. Remember, patience, observation, and gentle touches. That's how the ocean teaches us, and that's how we learn. They climbed into the pod, and Sandy guided it back to the ruins, the familiar glow of the carvings welcoming them. She adjusted the pod stabilizers to hover steadily above the mechanisms, letting SpongeBob and Patrick press their faces to the observation windows. The ancient gears glimmered faintly in the pod's lights, waiting, almost expectantly, for exploration. Sandy extended the pod's robotic arms, brushing lightly against the edges of a carved lever. Slowly, deliberately, she applied minimal pressure. The stone shifted imperceptibly, revealing a tiny hidden compartment within the structure. SpongeBob's eyes widened.
It worked. Sandy, it actually worked.
Patrick floated closer, whispering in awe.
It's magic. Kinda. Sandy shook her head gently, smiling. Not magic, Patrick.
Ingenuity, careful design, and patience. That's what we're witnessing. She continued methodically, testing each lever and panel, documenting movements, and recording subtle reactions in her instruments. Some levers caused others to shift, like a mechanical conversation that had waited centuries to be heard. SpongeBob's voice bubbled with excitement.
It's like they were teaching us. Like the ocean preserved a puzzle and now we're solving it.
Patrick's eyes widened.
Yeah, a secret lesson from the ocean.
Sandy nodded softly. Every interaction with the mechanisms revealed more about the intelligence and care of the ancient builders. The structure was not just functional, it was thoughtful. Each element interacted with others in a balance of pressure, geometry, and fluid dynamics, demonstrating knowledge far beyond what she had expected from any underwater civilization. As she progressed, Sandy discovered that the mechanisms also controlled small water channels within the stone platform. Tiny gates opened and closed, directing currents over specific surfaces. Bioluminescent algae that had long lain dormant began to glow faintly as water flowed through them, illuminating hidden carvings and patterns. SpongeBob and Patrick watched in silent wonder as the ocean's history revealed itself in light and motion. These channels, Sandy whispered, extending a robotic arm to trace the path of a flowing current. They're designed to interact with the environment, maybe for illumination, maybe for signaling, or maybe even for small-scale environmental control. Whoever built this, they understood balance, flow, and harmony. SpongeBob pressed his hands to the glass, mesmerized.
It's alive in a way. Not like a fish, but alive.
Patrick nodded slowly, whispering, "Yeah."
It's thinking.
Somehow, hours passed as Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick moved with careful precision through the ruins. Each test revealed more interactions, more signs of a civilization that had observed its environment with meticulous care. Sandy documented every detail, recording patterns, movements, and responses to each gentle manipulation of the mechanisms. She explained to her friends how subtle pressure, timing, and observation could unlock understanding without forcing change, teaching them that patience often held more power than speed or force. As the pod finally ascended toward the dome, the faint sunlight returned, casting long golden shafts into the water. Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over her. They had not only uncovered the functions of the ancient mechanisms, but had also shared in a profound lesson. Knowledge, patience, and respect for the environment could bring life to something long forgotten. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, absorbing the day's discoveries. Sandy gazed through the glass at the ruins below, feeling a profound connection to the ocean, the civilization that had created this system, and her friends who shared her journey. She realized that exploration was more than discovery. It was a dialogue, a gentle exchange with the world around her, a chance to honor intelligence, ingenuity, and the delicate balance of life. The ocean had entrusted her with its secrets, and she had listened carefully, responding with patience, respect, and quiet wonder. The ocean seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation as Sandy prepared for another descent, her mind alive with ideas. After discovering and understanding the ancient mechanisms, she felt a subtle thrill, the realization that the long-lost civilization had left tools, patterns, and knowledge that could work alongside her own inventions. Today, she intended to test that connection, to see if modern ingenuity and ancient design could meet in harmony beneath the waves. SpongeBob bounced in first, practically vibrating with excitement. "Sandy!"
Are we really going to, mix your gadgets with the old stuff?
Patrick floated in behind him, tilting his head.
Do you think it'll work, or...
"Break?" Sandy chuckled softly beneath her helmet. "It'll work if we're careful, Patrick. The key is patience, observation, and gentle experimentation. That's how we learn." They climbed into the deep diver pod, its hull gleaming under the dome's soft light. Sandy checked every instrument, every seal, and every robotic arm, then guided the pod toward the ruins. The faint glow of the ancient carvings welcomed them, and the mechanisms hummed softly, as if recognizing her return. SpongeBob pressed his face to the window, while Patrick clutched a handrail, trembling slightly but trusting Sandy's steady guidance. Sandy extended the pod's robotic arms to a series of cavities in the stone, where levers, gates, and channels had already responded to her previous manipulations. Slowly, deliberately, she connected her own small inventions, miniature water circulators, pressure sensors, and light-reflecting devices, to interact with the ancient mechanisms. SpongeBob watched, eyes wide, as subtle currents began to move through the channels, causing bioluminescent algae to glow softly. "Whoa!"
It's beautiful,
SpongeBob whispered.
It's like the ocean is alive with light.
Patrick floated closer, mouth slightly open.
It's like magic or teamwork between old and new.
Sandy smiled beneath her helmet. "Exactly.
It's not magic.
It's observation, understanding, and care. The ancient builders designed this system to interact with its environment. My inventions just help us see it fully. As she experimented, the mechanisms began to respond in unexpected ways. Small panels shifted to reveal hidden carvings, and gentle currents moved through tiny tunnels, illuminating patterns that had remained invisible for centuries. SpongeBob and Patrick leaned forward, mesmerized, realizing that exploration was as much about understanding and connection as it was about seeing. "Do you think they planned for someone like you to find this?" SpongeBob asked softly. Sandy shook her head gently. "Maybe not exactly me. But they understood that curiosity, care, and patience were universal. That's why their design survived. And now we get to learn from it, just as they intended." Hours passed as Sandy carefully adjusted each device, testing interactions and observing results. SpongeBob and Patrick moved with increasing confidence, following her explanations and noticing subtle responses from the ancient system. Every light, every shift of water, and every glowing algae cluster became a lesson in timing, balance, and quiet ingenuity. At one point, Sandy noticed a series of channels that had not fully responded to her instruments. She guided the pod closer, extending a small probe to test subtle pressure points. Slowly, as if awakening from centuries of sleep, the channels began to flow in a precise pattern. Light reflected off the algae and carvings, forming a luminous map that seemed to pulse gently, illustrating a forgotten sequence of events from the ancient civilization. Patrick whispered, awestruck.
"It's like a story."
"Written in water and light." SpongeBob nodded solemnly. "Yeah."
"The ocean is telling us something if we just watch." Sandy felt a deep, quiet satisfaction.
She realized that this blending of her inventions with the ancient mechanisms was not just about seeing hidden patterns. It was a dialogue across time. The ocean had preserved knowledge, and with patience, observation, and care, they could witness it and learn from it. As the pod began its ascent toward the dome, Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale. Sunlight filtered through the water, painting long golden beams across the ruins. SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, reflecting on the day's discoveries. Back in the dome, Sandy gazed through the glass at the softly glowing ruins below. She understood that exploration was a delicate dance, a conversation with the past and present, a lesson in patience, ingenuity, and shared wonder. The ocean had revealed secrets that survived centuries, and through gentle experimentation, observation, and respect, she had unlocked a dialogue that connected her to both the ancient builders and her friends. The ocean felt quieter than usual, as though holding its breath. Sandy guided the deep diver pod gently toward the ancient ruins, her mind alive with curiosity. Over the past weeks, she had explored the hidden ecosystem, the delicate species, and the intricate mechanisms of the underwater city. Each discovery had revealed more about the ocean's patient intelligence, and today she felt a quiet pull, something subtle, something almost intimate, drawing her toward a new secret. SpongeBob floated in first, practically bouncing in excitement.
"Sandy, do you think there's a message, like a secret the ocean wants to tell us?"
Patrick followed slowly, eyes wide and serious. "Do you think it's safe? I mean, ancient secrets sometimes."
Bite.
Sandy chuckled softly beneath her helmet. "It's safe, Patrick, as long as we stay careful and observant.
Messages aren't dangerous."
They're meant to be found by those who pay attention." They climbed into the pod and descended through the quiet blue, sunlight fading gradually behind them. The ruins glimmered faintly beneath the pod's lights, ancient carvings and mechanisms waiting patiently. Sandy guided the craft toward a section she had only briefly explored, where channels, levers, and reflective panels created a subtle interplay of currents and illumination. Today, she wanted to see what the ocean had preserved, not just as structures or mechanisms, but as a message. SpongeBob leaned close to the observation window, his wide eyes reflecting the soft glow of the bioluminescent algae. Sandy?
Do you think it's like a story?
Or a letter? Patrick's voice was hushed. Yeah, maybe.
Like someone wanted to...
Talk to us. Sandy extended the robotic arms, moving carefully over a set of small levers and panels. She nudged one gently and a hidden channel shifted. A faint stream of water flowed through the mechanism, illuminating carvings that had been invisible for centuries. The glowing algae reflected the light, forming a sequence of shapes and symbols. Sandy's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from awe. This
Is remarkable, she whispered.
It's not just a mechanism.
It's a message, deliberate, careful, meant to be discovered by someone patient enough to notice. SpongeBob pressed a hand to the glass, mesmerized. It's like the ocean is whispering to us.
Patrick nodded slowly.
Yeah, like it's personal.
Somehow. As Sandy adjusted the instruments and lights, the sequence of illuminated carvings became clearer. It wasn't a story in words, but a story in light, water, and motion. Shapes repeated, flowed into one another, and created patterns that suggested a memory, a record, a connection to the beings who had built the city long ago. SpongeBob's voice was soft.
It's sad, but beautiful.
Like someone wanted to be remembered, Patrick whispered, almost reverently. Yeah.
Like they trusted us to.
See it. Sandy's chest swelled with quiet emotion. The message was subtle, delicate, and deeply human, though no humans had ever lived here. It spoke of care, community, and the recognition that life, even in the ocean, was fleeting and precious. The mechanisms themselves were not just functional. They were vessels for memory, for communication, and for the preservation of hope. Hours passed as Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick explored the illuminated sequence, documenting each pattern and interpreting its movements. SpongeBob asked gentle questions, connecting the shapes with creatures they had seen, while Patrick floated silently, absorbing the gravity and beauty of the moment. Sandy realized that the message wasn't about answers or conclusions. It was about attention, respect, and presence. At one point, a subtle shift in the channels caused a small compartment to open, revealing tiny carvings resembling figures interacting with one another. Sandy's voice softened. These
represent their lives, their moments.
The care they took for each other and their environment. They wanted someone to understand, to remember, and we are doing that. SpongeBob and Patrick shared a quiet smile, their eyes reflecting awe and empathy. It's
beautiful, like
the ocean is alive with memory, SpongeBob said. Patrick whispered, yeah, and we
are part of it now. As the pod ascended toward the dome, the faint sunlight returned, casting long golden shafts across the water.
Sandy allowed herself a deep exhale, a sense of reverent satisfaction settling into her chest. The ocean had shared a personal secret, and through careful observation, patience, and respect, they had listened. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, reflecting on the discovery. Sandy gazed through the glass at the softly glowing ruins below, understanding that the joy of exploration was not only in uncovering secrets, but in connecting to the life, memory, and thought embedded in every curve of stone and stream of water. She realized that the ocean's messages were delicate and profound, meant for those who would listen. And in that quiet, meditative moment, she felt a deep connection, not only to the long-lost civilization, but to her friends and the ocean itself, all intertwined in a shared understanding of wonder.
Memory and care. The ocean held its breath.
A gentle, patient presence as Sandy guided the deep diver pod toward the glowing ruins once more. The message they had discovered in Chapter 23 lingered in her mind, a delicate sequence of light, water, and motion, a story preserved for centuries. Today she hoped to understand it more deeply, to interpret the emotions and subtle wisdom embedded in every channel, lever, and carved panel. SpongeBob floated in first,
practically vibrating with anticipation. Sandy! Are we going to, understand what they were feeling?
Patrick followed slowly, tilting his head. Do you think
It's safe to feel.
their feelings? Sandy chuckled softly beneath her helmet.
It's safe, Patrick.
Feelings in the ocean aren't dangerous, they're lessons.
And this message,
It's full of them. We just have to observe carefully, notice subtleties, and let it speak to us. They climbed into the pod, the familiar hum of the hull comforting as they descended through the deep blue. Sunlight faded behind them, leaving the ruins softly illuminated by their own instruments. Sandy guided the craft toward the channels and cavities where the mechanisms had revealed the glowing sequences. SpongeBob pressed close to the observation window, while Patrick clutched a handrail, nervous but trusting Sandy's careful guidance. Sandy extended the robotic arms to adjust minor flow patterns and light reflections, allowing the algae and channels to display the sequence in its fullest form. Slowly, the light illuminated subtle carvings, figures holding one another, creatures moving together, moments of care frozen in stone. The patterns flowed like memories, each movement a quiet lesson in empathy, cooperation, and understanding. SpongeBob whispered softly, his voice full of awe.
it's
They're showing us how they cared.
for each other. For everything around them. Patrick's eyes widened. Yeah,
They trusted us to see it and feel it too. Sandy nodded beneath her helmet, her chest filling with quiet reverence. The ancient civilization had left more than mechanisms. They had left a record of emotion, a carefully preserved story about connection, patience, and respect. Each movement of the channels, each gentle glow, was a lesson in subtlety, teaching that life was more than survival. It was attentiveness, care, and gentle interaction. She guided the pod carefully through the sequence, highlighting key moments where currents illuminated figures interacting with one another. Some figures appeared to share resources, others protected the small and fragile, and still others moved together in synchrony, a dance of cooperation that had survived centuries beneath the waves. SpongeBob and Patrick absorbed it in silence, their expressions soft with reflection. These
aren't just movements, Sandy whispered.
their intentions.
Moments captured as patterns, teaching us something timeless, how to observe, how to connect, how to respect the balance of life. SpongeBob pressed a hand to the glass, mesmerized. It's
The ocean is alive with wisdom.
and love, all at once. Patrick nodded slowly, whispering, yeah! And now we're
Part of it too. Hours passed as Sandy and her friends observed, interpreted, and documented the illuminated sequences. She explained the subtle interplay between pressure points, currents, and light reflections, showing how each interaction conveyed emotion, intention, and understanding. SpongeBob asked gentle questions, making connections between the patterns and the living creatures they had seen in the hidden ecosystem, while Patrick absorbed the lessons in quiet, thoughtful awe. At one point, Sandy noticed a pattern that resembled a small gathering, figures encircling one another protectively. She extended the robotic arm to trace the carvings lightly.
see this?
She said softly. It's about care and community. They preserved it so we could witness it, understand it, and learn from it. It's a gentle reminder that life, no matter how small or hidden, is meaningful and worthy of attention. SpongeBob and Patrick exchanged quiet glances, understanding the depth of what they were observing.
It's beautiful, SpongeBob whispered. Like someone wanted to make sure we remembered how to care. Patrick nodded, voice low and reverent.
Yeah, and the ocean,
Made sure it stayed.
just for us. As the pod ascended toward the dome, the soft, golden sunlight returned, casting long rays across the water. Sandy allowed herself a deep, reflective exhale, They had not only witnessed ancient mechanisms but had experienced their emotional resonance. The ocean had preserved a record of empathy, patience, and gentle wisdom, and through careful observation, she and her friends had listened. Back in the dome, SpongeBob and Patrick floated quietly, absorbing the lessons of connection and care. Sandy gazed through the glass at the softly glowing ruins below, understanding that exploration was not just about discovery, it was about understanding, feeling, and carrying forward the subtle wisdom that life, even in the deepest, quietest corners, could offer. The ocean was quiet that evening, a soft, endless blue stretching into infinity. Sandy floated above the ruins in the deep diver pod, letting the gentle currents cradle her as she reflected on everything she and her friends had discovered. The delicate species, the intricate mechanisms, the glowing messages, all of it had been a lesson in patience, care, and quiet observation. And now, as the sun's rays filtered softly through the water, Sandy felt a gentle sense of completion, a rhythm in her heart that mirrored the pulse of the sea itself. SpongeBob floated nearby, eyes wide and thoughtful.
Sandy, I can't believe all of this was here.
Waiting for us, Patrick nodded slowly, voice soft.
Yeah, it's like
The ocean remembered us.
in its own way. Sandy smiled beneath her helmet, feeling warmth spread through her chest.
The ocean doesn't just remember, it teaches. Every creature, every current, every carving we've seen, they're lessons. Lessons about care, patience, respect, and connection.
And the most important one is that we're part of it all, just by noticing and being present.
They drifted silently over the ruins, letting the soft glow of bioluminescent algae and illuminated channels cast gentle patterns across the pod's interior. Sandy extended a robotic arm to trace the carvings one last time, feeling the textures beneath her fingertips, imagining the hands that had etched them centuries ago. There was no rush, no urgency, just reverent attention. SpongeBob whispered, "Do you think—"
They wanted someone to understand them. All this time?
Patrick's voice was quiet, almost awed. "Yeah, like a message."
Left for friends.
"In the future," Sandy nodded, her thoughts turning inward. "Exactly."
And that's what makes this so meaningful.
It wasn't meant to be found by accident. It wasn't just a discovery. It was an invitation to learn, to connect, to feel.
We've listened.
We've understood. And that's the legacy they'd left behind. Hours passed as they floated gently above the city, observing the currents and glowing lights one last time. Sandy reflected on how much she had learned, not only about the ocean and its hidden wonders, but about patience, empathy, and the quiet strength of paying attention. The mechanisms had shown her that ingenuity could survive centuries if treated with respect. The glowing messages had taught her that emotion, memory, and connection could endure even in the deepest, most hidden places. SpongeBob and Patrick had changed too. They were quieter, more thoughtful, their curiosity tempered by reverence and understanding. Sandy realized that the journey had not just been about discovery, it had been about growth. For all of them, Sandy guided the pod slowly toward the surface, letting the sunlight filter through the water, warming the hull and bathing them in golden light. She looked back at the ruins, their intricate carvings and glowing channels fading into the deep blue, and felt a soft ache of gratitude.
We've seen something rare, she whispered. Something beautiful. And we've carried it with us, even as we rise toward the light. SpongeBob pressed a hand to the window, his voice soft and reverent. It's like they're still here, somehow.
In the water, in the light, Patrick nodded slowly. Yeah, and
We'll remember them, and the lessons they left.
for us. Sandy exhaled deeply, feeling the quiet weight and joy of the ocean's wisdom. She realized that exploration was never truly about possession or conquest. It was about connection. Every observation, every careful movement, every moment of patience had been a conversation across time, bridging centuries, civilizations,
and the living world around them as the pod broke the surface.
Sunlight spilled across the water, soft and warm. Sandy felt the pulse of the ocean beneath her, a steady, patient rhythm that seemed to echo the lessons they had learned. The ocean had shared its secrets gently, and in return they had listened carefully, carried its messages in their hearts, and honored its quiet beauty. Sandy turned to SpongeBob and Patrick, her voice tender. "We've experienced something extraordinary, and it's a part of us now. The ocean will always have more to teach, but the lessons we've learned today, they're ours to carry gently wherever we go." SpongeBob smiled softly.
"Thanks for
"Letting us be a part of it, Sandy," Patrick nodded, voice quiet and sincere.
Yeah, thanks."
"For everything." Sandy allowed herself one last deep breath, feeling the connection, the understanding, and the shared wonder of the journey settle within her. The ocean, the ruins, the mechanisms, the glowing messages, they were all part of a tapestry of patience, care, and quiet intelligence. And through careful observation, reverence, and friendship, they had touched it, learned from it, and carried it forward. And with that, Sandy, SpongeBob, and Patrick drifted gently in the warm currents, a soft sigh echoing through the pod. Somewhere in the deep blue, the ocean held its secrets patiently, waiting for the next attentive heart to listen. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well.
Everything's gonna be okay, man.